We are talking wonderful animals. This hour, if you've got a story of a wonderful animal in your life, give me a call, 1300 222 612. And in contrast to that, you might have noticed a story this week about a man who appeared in court pleading guilty to hitting a puppy. And stories like this can be upsetting and often include distressing images or video. But how do we know, or what do we know really about why some people are violent towards animals? Eleonora Gullone is a developmental psychologist, and she's researched the link between animal cruelty and aggression, particularly in children and adolescents. Hi, Eleanor.
Hello, good afternoon.
Why is it helpful to explore the reasons why people are cruel to animals?
Well, to have an understanding of behaviour, it's always easier to work toward preventing it. So understanding is hugely important. And the research that's been done looking at animal cruelty in children or by children shows that it's a strong marker of problematic behaviours performed by the children, but also that the children have experienced. There's a strong link that's been shown between animal cruelty and violent and aggressive behaviours toward humans.
So do you know where the balance lies? Is it that children who are cruel to animal have more innate psychopathic tendencies, or is it that the cruel behaviour is training them to be more violent?
Actually, there's research to support both. There's research that's looked at what's called callous unemotional traits, psychopathy and callous unemotional traits. And children who are cruel to animals, behave aggressively toward animals, have a likelihood, a higher likelihood of having higher tendencies toward those traits. Another way of describing it is having extremely low empathy. So there is research to support some biological predisposition toward those behaviours, but there's also strong research, and probably stronger research, showing that children who are cruel to animals are children who have likely experienced aggression toward themselves and or who have witnessed cruelty toward animals.
Okay, I'd like to talk about that environmental side second. Just quickly on the biological issue though, if children do have an innate callousness, as you say, is there anything a parent can do about that?
Certainly the environment that the child is in will either minimise or prevent the development of that characteristic from developing, or will cultivate it. And so the environments where animals and, well, not only animals, but people are treated with kindness and compassion are less likely to bring out that characteristic in children. So I guess on a more global or a population scale, humane education in schools, teaching the promotion of empathy in schools and in neighbourhoods and in families would be a wonderful way of minimising the development of those traits.
What's a way of developing empathy in the family situation with your own child? Like if they chase birds at the park, if they chase animals, is that a problem? Or what's the best way to teach empathy towards animals to your own kids?
One of the best ways is to model the behaviour. Children learn enormous amounts from watching particularly the significant others in their lives. And so if parents treat animals with kindness, it's very likely that the children will learn to treat animals with kindness. In fact, one of the studies that I did with one of my students, showed that children who witnessed adults being cruel to animals were more likely to engage in animal cruelty, but it wasn't just any adult, it was significant others in their lives. So children are very strongly influenced, and their learning is strongly influenced by those people who mean a lot to them, and particularly affectively, emotionally mean a lot to them.
You're listening to ABC Radio. I'm talking to developmental psychologist Eleonora Gullone about animal cruelty. What kind of influences could lead a child to acting out cruelly towards animal? Did you say if they'd witnessed violence? Is it
Yes.
that, or is there anything else that could cause them to be aggressive?
Yes, I've looked at other people's research, but I've also been involved in research that's looked at domestic violence and animal cruelty. And my research study, as well as studies done by others, has shown that children who are in families where there has been domestic violence are more likely to be cruel to animals. Now, that's a combination of the reason for that would be one of two possibilities or both. They've witnessed aggressive behaviour toward the adults in their lives, and they've also witnessed cruelty toward animals, because what we've found is that in families where there is domestic violence, in more than 50% and as high as even three-quarters of families where there is family violence, animals are likely to be aggressed against. So there is more likely to be animal cruelty, and the children see this. So that's one of the reasons. And another one is that the children may have also experienced aggression themselves. So there's a relationship between bullied and being cruel to animals. If children have been the victims of abuse, they're more likely to abuse, and animals being weaker than them are likely to be.
Is that well known by teachers or other parents if they want to look out for that for a child and who might have trouble in their own household, look out for that child being cruel to animals? Is that well known by teachers and other parents as a warning sign to look out for?
I don't know that it's well known. I do know that from researchers, including myself, there has been strong recommendation to cross-report, so that, for example, family protection services, police services, and animal welfare organisations would do well to cross-report with each other, so that channels of communication remain open, and people like teachers in schools would become aware of the situation of a child at home, for example. That would be something that would make it more likely that if a child is being abused, that is picked up. I know that in Victoria the link is recognised. I don't know that the response is as strong as it should be, and I don't know that it's recognised as strongly as it should be in other parts of the country.
And if the issue is left unchecked, what kind of behaviour can that lead to?
Well, there are two types of childhood animal cruelty. There's what's referred to as the child onset, and then there's the adolescent onset. Child onset animal cruelty is more likely to develop to a more severe point, where children will grow up into adults who then engage in aggressive and violent behaviours continue toward animals, but also generalised to other humans. The adolescent onset can continue, but tends to fade away, and certainly if it does continue, doesn't necessarily get as extreme as a child onset animal cruelty.
So if parents are concerned that the child is acting out in this way, what should they do?
They should seek counselling, and certainly counsel the child themselves, model behaviours that are more consistent with kindness rather than cruelty, and certainly educate the child about those behaviours. The problem is that in a lot of the situations where we see this, it's actually a large part of it is because the parents are modelling those behaviours. So often it needs to be someone from outside of the family that helps to break the cycle.
If someone from outside the family does come in to intervene, what kind of therapies would you as a psychologist offer to help a child?
As I said, it would be humane education, promotion of empathy, cultivation of empathy, teaching and modelling behaviours toward others, not just animals, but others, humans, children and other adults, that are kind. We know that there's a very strong link between cruelty toward animals and aggression toward humans. In fact, in the book that I wrote, I basically called it more than, there's argument that there is a link, but I actually said that it's more than a link, because the foundations of those behaviours are essentially the same. What we're getting is a different outlet or a different expression of those traits, so that it's either aggression toward a human or aggression toward an animal, but it's aggression, it's violence, and it's just the victim is someone else, but the foundation is the same.
You're listening to ABC Radio. I'm talking to developmental psychologist Eleonora Gullone about cruelty towards animals. What about cruelty towards animals in adults? What does that say about a person?
Basically, not a lot that's different. Same thing. They tend to have low empathy. In fact, way back in the 1970s, the FBI Special Investigative Unit found that animal cruelty in adults was a marker of things like serial killings at the more extreme end of the dimension, or serial killers. So people who are cruel to animals are very likely to be engaged in aggressive behaviours toward others. And so I guess I always become concerned when sentences by adults, sentences for animal cruelty by adults are very lenient, because it's a serious crime. People who are cruel to animals, particularly those who are cruel in violent ways toward animals, are very likely to be people who are going to be engaging in other behaviours, such as could be other aggressive behaviours, or drug dealings and other behaviours that are antisocial. So there's also, in addition to aggression and violence, there's an antisocial link with animal cruelty. These are people who basically have trouble to adhering to the values and laws of a society.
Just talking about that social element, is there anything within our culture that encourages us to be more or less cruel towards animals? Do you think there's some kind of cultural influence?
Well, I always worry, and I really can't understand the logic of governments who continue to keep behaviours that have aggressive undertones legal. When I talk about those behaviours, I'm talking about things such as duck shooting, greyhound racing, horse racing, particularly greyhound racing, though, especially since we've heard about in 2015, heard about the live baiting. We know that live baiting continues. So people involved in greyhound racing, we know, have engaged in behaviours that are not only illegal but cruel to animals, yet governments continue to keep these behaviours legal. Greyhound racing continues to be legal. So when we know that there are behaviours that are violent, aggressive and cruel, and we have them continue to be legal in society, how can we not think that we're promoting animal cruelty?
Yeah, and without sort of getting too political about particular governments, is it that if you see animals as a means to an end, like in the form of a race animal, just seeing animals as a means to an end, that can create problems for how you treat them?
Absolutely, because you see the profit. You see them as a thing rather than a being who has feelings and who can suffer.
And that's probably one of the advantages of having a pet, isn't it? Is to develop that kind of empathy towards animals.
Absolutely. As long as the pet is treated with compassion and kindness. The other thing that we know is that families where there is domestic violence are more likely to have animals. So having a pet doesn't necessarily promote kindness and empathy. Having a pet and treating that pet with kindness does. I mean, what we know is that children have a natural affinity to love animals, to be fascinated by them and to want to play with them. And so when that relationship or when that behaviour toward animals is not one of kindness, fascination and joy and fun, we know that something's going wrong. And often, as I said earlier, it's something often within the family environment that's going wrong.
Yeah, that is an interesting perspective, using cruelty towards animals as a sign of bigger things. I'm sure there's much more to discuss about this. Eleonora Gullone, developmental psychologist, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
ABC Radio, Brisbane and Queensland. Streaming now.